The station floated in the darkness of space like a jewel among the stars. Station Zenith was home to the most important school in the galaxy, a place where young minds from hundreds of worlds came to learn. The Interstellar Academy had been teaching students for over 1,000 years, and its rules were as old as its halls. Every species that joined the galactic community sent their best and brightest here, hoping they would succeed where so many others had failed. Katie Morgan walked through the crowded hallways with her datapad tucked under one arm. She was in her final year at the academy, studying quantum mechanics and xenobiology. The human woman had brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her eyes showed the tiredness of someone who had stayed up too late studying again. Around her, dozens of alien students moved between classes. Some floated, some walked on multiple legs, and some moved in ways that seemed to defy the laws of physics she was studying. The academy was nothing like the universities back on Earth. Here, the buildings were made of materials that shifted colors based on the time of day. The gravity changed from section to section to accommodate different species. The air itself was filtered and adjusted for each classroom, making sure everyone could breathe comfortably. Katie had gotten used to most of it by now, but sometimes she still felt out of place among beings who had been traveling the stars for millennia, while humans were still figuring out basic space travel. Her first class of the day was Advanced Quantum Theory, taught by a Vex instructor named Zek-7. The Vex were strange creatures even by galactic standards. They looked like walking crystals, their bodies made of a material that seemed both solid and liquid at the same time. They didn't have faces in the traditional sense, just smooth surfaces that occasionally rippled with color to show emotion. Zek-7 never showed emotion, though. The Vex were purely logical beings who made decisions based on calculations and probability. Katie took her seat near the front of the classroom. Her study partner, Zek-7, was already there, the crystal being turned toward her, its surface flashing a brief blue to acknowledge her presence. Katie had learned that blue meant neutral recognition, nothing more. The Vex didn't understand human concepts like friendship or casual conversation. To them, study partners were simply the most efficient way to share information and verify calculations. The class began, and the instructor projected complex equations into the air using holographic technology. Katie watched carefully, taking notes on her datapad. The material was difficult even for her. She had always been good at math and science back on Earth, but here she was competing with beings whose brains worked in ways humans couldn't fully understand. The Vex could process multiple calculations simultaneously. The Zeph, another species in her class, shared a collective consciousness that allowed them to pool their knowledge instantly. Katie only had her human brain and her stubborn determination. After class, Katie headed to the cafeteria for lunch. The dining hall was enormous, with different sections serving food appropriate for different species. Some ate crystalline minerals, others consumed pure energy, and a few needed organic matter like humans did. Katie grabbed a simple sandwich and found a table near the windows that looked out into space. She liked watching the stars while she ate. It reminded her of why she had come here in the first place. A shadow fell across her table. Katie looked up to see Krath standing there. The Kryn warrior was massive, easily 7 feet tall, with skin that looked like it was made of dark metal. His species valued strength and honor above all else, and they had little patience for what they saw as weakness. Krath had never been friendly to Katie, but he had never been openly hostile either. He seemed to view her with a kind of confused respect, as if he couldn't quite figure out why such a small, soft creature would choose to study alongside beings who could crush her without effort. Krath didn't say anything, just grunted and moved on to sit with other Kryn students. Katie went back to her sandwich. She had gotten used to the strange social dynamics of the academy. Most species kept to themselves, socializing mainly with their own kind. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, having only joined 50 years ago. There weren't many human students at the academy, maybe 20 out of several thousand students total. The afternoon brought lab work in the xenobiology department. Katie put on her safety gear and entered the lab, where samples from hundreds of worlds were kept in special containment fields. Today's assignment was to analyze the cellular structure of a plant-like organism from a world near the galactic core. Katie worked carefully, using tools that could examine matter at the molecular level. The work was painstaking and required absolute focus. Her lab partner today was Kara, one of the Delphi. The Delphi were mammalian like humans, which made them easier for Katie to relate to. They had fur covering their bodies and large, expressive eyes. Kara was friendly in a way most aliens weren't, and she had helped Katie adjust to life at the academy during her first year. The two of them worked well together, Kara's natural intuition complementing Katie's methodical approach. As they worked, Kara chatted about the upcoming term. There were only a few months left before graduation, and everyone was feeling the pressure. Final exams would be brutal, and the graduation requirements were strict. Students had to maintain high grades, complete a major research project, and pass a series of practical examinations. The failure rate was high, even for species that had been attending the academy for generations. Katie thought about graduation as she worked. She had come so far, worked so hard. When she first arrived at Station Zenith 4 years ago, she had been overwhelmed by everything. The technology, the aliens, the advanced material that made Earth's universities look like kindergarten classes. But she had pushed through, studying late into the night, asking questions when she didn't understand, and refusing to give up even when the work seemed impossible. The day ended with a diplomacy seminar, one of the required courses for all students. The instructor, Elder Voss, was ancient even by galactic standards. No one knew exactly what species he was, only that he had been running the academy for centuries. He was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to shimmer between different colors. His voice was deep and commanding, and when he spoke, everyone listened. Today's lesson was about conflict resolution between different species. Elder Voss explained how what seemed logical to one species might seem insane to another, and how understanding these differences was crucial for maintaining peace in the galaxy. Katie found the subject fascinating. She had always been interested in how different cultures interacted, and here she was learning about cultures that evolved on completely different worlds. When the seminar ended, Katie gathered her things and headed back to her quarters. The walk took her through several different sections of the station, each with its own atmosphere and gravity. By the time she reached her small room, she was exhausted. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto her bed, staring up at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring more classes, more studying, more pushing herself to keep up with beings who seemed naturally better at everything. But Katie Morgan didn't quit. That was something humans were known for in the galaxy. Even if they weren't known for much else yet, humans didn't quit when things got hard. They adapted, they learned, and they kept going. As she drifted off to sleep, Katie reminded herself of that. Just a few more months and she would have her degree. Just a few more months of impossible work, and she would prove that a human could succeed at the most prestigious academy in the galaxy. Katie sat in the medical bay of Station Zenith, her hands gripping the edge of the examination table. The doctor, a being from a species called the Madari who specialized in healing, looked at the holographic display showing Katie's test results. The Madari had 6 arms and skin that glowed with a soft purple light. Her name was Venna, and she had been practicing medicine for longer than humans had been using electricity. Dr. Venna turned to Katie, her large eyes showing concern. She spoke in the common galactic language, which Katie's translator implant converted to English in her mind. The word still hit her like a physical blow. Katie was pregnant. The doctor explained that she was approximately 8 weeks along, based on the human reproductive cycle. Venna seemed confused by something in the results, checking them multiple times as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Katie asked what was wrong. Dr. Venna explained that in all her years of practice, she had never had a student patient who was pregnant. Most species at the academy were young by their species standards, but reproduction for them was either planned years in advance or happened during specific biological cycles. The Vex reproduced once every century through a process called crystalline budding. The Zeph added new members to their collective through genetic merging that required their entire hive. The Kryn had specific breeding seasons and could only reproduce on their homeworld due to environmental requirements. Even the Delphi, who were mammalian like humans, had reproduction cycles that only occurred once every few years. For a species to reproduce while attending school was practically unheard of. Dr. Venna asked Katie if she planned to return to Earth. Surely she would need to withdraw from the academy to deal with this situation. The medical requirements alone would be significant, and caring for offspring required full attention. No student had ever attempted to continue their studies while pregnant or raising a child. Katie sat in silence for a long moment. She thought about everything she had worked for over the past 4 years. The late nights studying, the difficult exams, the research projects that had pushed her to her limits. She thought about her family back on Earth, who were so proud of her for being accepted to the academy. She thought about graduation, which was only a few months away. She was so close to finishing, so close to achieving something that very few humans had accomplished. Then Katie looked at Dr. Venna and said something that would later be recorded in the Academy's historical files. She said she wasn't going anywhere. She was going to finish her degree on schedule. The baby would just have to come along for the ride. Dr. Venna was quiet for a moment, her purple glow flickering with what might have been surprise. She asked if Katie understood what she was saying. Pregnancy in humans, based on the medical data in the galactic database, involved significant physical changes. There would be fatigue, discomfort, and eventually the birth itself. After birth, human offspring required constant care and feeding. How could Katie possibly maintain her studies through all of that? Katie smiled, though she didn't feel particularly happy. She explained that human women had been working and studying while pregnant for thousands of years. Back on Earth, it was common for women to maintain their careers and education right up until birth, and many returned to work shortly after. Humans were adaptable. They had to be because Earth had never been an easy world. Katie said she would figure it out, the same way human women had been figuring it out since the beginning of their species. Dr. Venna said she would need to inform the Academy administration. This was an unprecedented situation, and Elder Voss would need to make a decision about how to proceed. Katie agreed, knowing there was no way to keep this secret anyway. As she left the medical bay, her mind was racing with thoughts about what came next. The meeting with Elder Voss happened 2 days later. Katie sat in his office, which was decorated with artifacts from hundreds of worlds. The ancient being sat behind a desk made of some material that seemed to shift and flow like water, but remained solid to the touch. His expression was unreadable as Dr. Venna explained the situation. Elder Voss asked Katie several questions. He wanted to know if she understood the physical demands of pregnancy. Katie said she did. He asked if she understood that her academic performance might suffer. Katie said she would work harder to make sure it didn't. He asked if she had support systems in place. Katie explained that while her family was back on Earth, she had friends at the academy who would help her. The elder was quiet for a long time. Finally, he explained the academy's position. In the 1,000 years of the institution's history, no student had ever attempted what Katie was proposing. The academy had rules and traditions designed to ensure students could focus entirely on their studies. Those rules existed because the material was difficult enough without additional complications. He said that while he admired Katie's determination, he had to consider what was best for her and the academy. Elder Voss offered Katie an honorable withdrawal. She would receive documentation showing she had completed most of her degree with excellent marks. She could return in a few years after the child was older and complete her final requirements. Many species took breaks in their education for various reasons. There was no shame in it. In fact, he suggested it was the logical and responsible choice. Katie listened to everything he said. Then she politely but firmly declined his offer. She explained that she only had 1 semester left. Her research project was nearly complete. Her grades were strong. She saw no reason why she couldn't finish what she had started. She acknowledged that it would be difficult, but difficult didn't mean impossible. Humans had a saying that she had grown up hearing. Where there's a will, there's a way. Elder Voss looked at her with something that might have been respect or might have been concern. He said that if she was determined to continue, the academy would not force her to leave. However, she would be held to the same standards as every other student. There would be no special accommodations, no extensions on assignments, no lowered expectations. If she fell behind or failed to meet requirements, she would not graduate. Katie said she understood and accepted those terms. As word spread through the academy about Katie's situation, reactions were mixed. Zek7, her Vex study partner, could not comprehend the logic of her decision. The crystal being ran calculations showing that Katie's efficiency would drop significantly. Zek7 presented these calculations to Katie, explaining that the probability of her maintaining her current academic performance was less than 30%. When Katie said she would beat those odds, Zek7 simply rippled with colors that indicated confusion. Krath, the Kryn warrior, had a different reaction. He approached Katie in the cafeteria one day, his massive form blocking out the light from the windows. In his deep, rumbling voice, he told her that her choice dishonored both her studies and her offspring. A warrior committed fully to their task, whether that task was battle or breeding. To divide attention between two such important matters was weakness. Katie thanked him for his opinion and went back to eating her lunch. Only Kara, the Delphi, seemed supportive. She told Katie that while she had her doubts, she also knew that humans were strange in ways the galaxy was still trying to understand. If anyone could do this impossible thing, maybe it was Katie. Kara offered to help however she could, which mainly meant making sure Katie ate properly and didn't overwork herself. The weeks passed and Katie's body began to change. She felt tired more often, and some days she felt sick in the mornings. But she kept going to classes, kept completing her assignments, and kept working on her research project. The other students watched her with curiosity, as if she were an experiment they were all observing. Katie tried not to think about their stares and whispers. She had a degree to finish and a baby on the way, and she didn't have time to worry about what anyone else thought. The quantum mechanics classroom was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic projectors. Zex-7 stood at the front, presenting the findings from their joint research project. The crystal being's surface rippled with colors as it spoke, displaying data and calculations in the air around it. Katie sat at her desk, her hand resting on her growing belly. She was 4 months pregnant now, and it was becoming impossible to hide. After Zex-7 finished the presentation, it turned to Katie, waiting for her to add her portion of the work. Katie stood up carefully, feeling the weight of every eye in the room on her. She walked to the front and began explaining the theoretical applications of their research. Her voice was steady despite her nervousness. She had spent hours preparing this presentation, working late into the night when she should have been sleeping. As Katie spoke, she noticed Zex-7 watching her with what seemed like intense focus. After class, the crystal being approached her with a question. Zex-7 wanted to know how Katie was maintaining her academic performance. The Vex had been running continuous calculations since learning about Katie's pregnancy, and the numbers didn't make sense. By all logical predictions, Katie's work should have declined significantly. Instead, her grades had actually improved slightly. Katie tried to explain that humans were good at pushing through difficult situations. They had evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill them, with predators and diseases and natural disasters. Human bodies and minds had learned to keep functioning even when conditions were far from ideal. Pregnancy was natural for humans, not a disability. Women back on Earth worked full jobs, raised families, and pursued education all at the same time. It was just what humans did. Zex-7's surface flashed with colors that Katie had learned meant deep confusion. The Vex asked if this meant humans were somehow superior to other species. Katie quickly said no. She explained that every species had different strengths. The Vex could process information faster than any human ever could. The Zeph could share knowledge instantly through their collective consciousness. The Kryn were stronger and more durable. Humans just happened to be very good at adapting and multitasking. It was their evolutionary advantage. The crystal being was quiet for a moment, its surface showing patterns Katie couldn't interpret. Then Zex-7 said something unexpected. It said that it wanted to continue observing Katie's progress, not to prove her wrong, but to understand how she was accomplishing what seemed impossible. Katie smiled and said that was fine, as long as Zex-7 kept helping with their study partnership. The Vex's surface flickered blue in acknowledgement. In the training halls where the Kryn practiced their combat skills, Krath was having his own thoughts about the human student. He had initially seen Katie's choice as dishonorable, but the more he watched her, the more confused he became. The Kryn valued strength above all else, and they defined strength as the ability to overcome challenges through force and determination. By that definition, what Katie was doing required immense strength. Krath spoke with his fellow Kryn warriors about this puzzle. Most of them agreed that Katie's situation was strange and probably foolish, but one of the older warriors said something that made Krath think. The warrior explained that there were many kinds of strength. Physical power was the most obvious, but there was also strength of will, strength of mind, and strength of purpose. Perhaps what Katie was demonstrating was a form of strength the Kryn had not properly recognized. This idea bothered Krath. His entire culture was built around a specific understanding of what made someone strong or weak. If humans had a different kind of strength, what did that mean? He decided to watch Katie more closely, trying to understand this puzzle. The observation came during a practical examination in the xenobiology lab. Students were required to work with dangerous organisms from various worlds, using proper safety procedures to study them without getting hurt. It was a test of knowledge, skill, and steady nerves. Katie was working with a sample from a toxic plant that could cause severe reactions if mishandled. Krath watched from his own station as Katie worked. She moved slowly and carefully, her pregnant belly making some movements awkward. At one point, she had to stop and adjust her position to reach a tool. For a moment, Krath thought she would make a mistake, that her physical limitations would cause her to fail. But Katie simply adapted. She found a different way to reach the tool, completed the procedure perfectly, and documented her findings with the same precision as always. After the examination, Krath approached Katie. He told her that he had been wrong to call her choice dishonorable. What she was doing required a different kind of honor, one that his people had not taught him to recognize. Katie seemed surprised by this, but she thanked him. From that day forward, Krath stopped seeing Katie as weak and started seeing her as a different kind of warrior. Kara the Delphi had become Katie's closest friend during this time. The two of them ate lunch together most days, and Kara made sure Katie was taking care of herself. The Delphi was naturally nurturing, which was common for her species. She worried about Katie constantly, even though Katie kept insisting she was fine. One day, as they sat in the cafeteria, Kara asked Katie if she was scared. Katie was quiet for a moment before admitting that yes, she was terrified. She was scared that something would go wrong with the pregnancy. She was scared that she would fail her classes. She was scared that she was making a terrible mistake by trying to do both things at once, but she was more scared of giving up. If she left the academy now, she might never come back. Life had a way of getting complicated, and there would always be reasons to postpone her dreams. Kara listened carefully, her large eyes showing empathy. She told Katie that the Delphi had a saying in their language. Translated roughly, it meant that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. Katie was showing more courage than most beings Kara had ever met. The friendship between Katie and Kara became well known throughout the academy. Other students watched their interactions with interest. Some species found the concept of cross-species friendship strange, but others began to see it as an example of the kind of connection that made the galactic community possible. As Katie entered her 5th month of pregnancy, more students began approaching her with questions. They wanted to know about human reproduction, about Earth culture, about how humans could possibly balance so many things at once. Katie answered their questions patiently, turning her situation into an educational opportunity. A group of Zeph students, who normally kept to themselves and their collective consciousness, asked Katie to give a presentation about human child-rearing practices. Katie agreed, spending an evening explaining how humans typically managed pregnancy, birth, and the raising of offspring. The Zeph were fascinated. Their method of adding new members to the collective involved no pregnancy at all. They simply merged genetic material in a special ceremony and integrated the new consciousness into their hive mind. The presentation led to more discussions. Students from different species began sharing information about their own reproductive methods. What started as curiosity about Katie's situation turned into a broader educational exchange. Elder Voss heard about these informal gatherings and approved of them. The Academy's purpose was to foster understanding between different species, and Katie had accidentally created exactly that kind of opportunity. But not all attention was positive. Some students and faculty members still believed Katie was making a mistake. They whispered that she was being stubborn and foolish, that she would fail eventually. A few professors seemed almost eager for her to struggle, as if her failure would prove something about the superiority of their own species and methods. Katie heard these whispers but tried to ignore them. She focused on her work, on her health, and on preparing for both graduation and motherhood. Every day was a challenge, but every day she proved she could meet that challenge. The aliens could watch and calculate and predict all they wanted. Katie was going to prove them all wrong one day at a time. The mid-semester break at the Interstellar Academy lasted only 2 weeks, a brief pause in the intense academic schedule. Most students used this time to visit their home worlds or catch up on research projects. Katie Morgan had different plans. She spent the first 3 days of the break in the medical bay of Station Zenith, bringing her daughter into the universe. Dr. Venna had prepared extensively for this event. The Madari physician had studied human birth procedures from the Galactic Medical Database, consulted with doctors back on Earth via long-range communication, and set up the medical bay with everything Katie might need. Several other medical staff members were present as well, not because Katie needed them, but because they wanted to observe. Human birth was something none of them had witnessed before. The labor lasted 14 hours. To the alien medical staff, this seemed impossibly fast. Dr. Venna explained that when the Delphi gave birth, the process took nearly a month as the offspring slowly emerged from a protective pouch. The Kryn laid eggs that took 6 months to hatch. Even species that bore live young like humans typically took days or weeks for the actual birthing process. 14 hours seemed almost instantaneous by galactic standards. Katie didn't think it felt fast at all. The pain was intense, coming in waves that left her breathless. But she focused on what human women had been doing since the beginning of their species. She breathed through the contractions, pushed when Dr. Venna told her to push, and refused to give up even when everything hurt. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she heard the sound she had been waiting for, her baby's first cry. Dr. Venna held up the tiny infant, her purple glow brightening with what might have been joy. The baby was healthy, with all the proper fingers and toes and organs that human babies were supposed to have. Katie reached out with trembling arms, and the doctor placed the baby on her chest. In that moment, everything else faded away. The academy, the alien species watching with fascination, the impossible task she had set for herself. All that mattered was the small, warm weight of her daughter. Katie named her Emma. It was a simple name, traditional and easy to pronounce. As Katie held Emma for the first time, she whispered promises to her. She promised to be a good mother. She promised to finish what she had started. She promised that Emma would grow up knowing her mother never quit, no matter how hard things got. The medical staff were amazed by how quickly Katie recovered. Within hours of giving birth, she was sitting up, eating, and caring for Emma on her own. Dr. Venna had expected Katie to need days of intensive care, based on how traumatic the birthing process had looked. But Katie explained that while birth was difficult, human women were designed to recover quickly. Evolution had made sure of that because in ancient times, a woman who couldn't move soon after birth would be vulnerable to predators. The galaxy's reaction to Emma's birth was immediate and widespread. News traveled fast through the galactic communication networks. The human student who had refused to quit her studies was now a mother. Many beings across the galaxy assumed this meant Katie would finally withdraw from the academy. Surely now she would see reason and return to Earth with her infant. Caring for a newborn required constant attention. How could anyone possibly continue advanced studies while dealing with a baby? Katie returned to her quarters 4 days after giving birth. She moved slowly, still sore from the delivery, but she was determined to start preparing for classes to resume. She had set up a corner of her small room as a nursery, with a crib and supplies that had been shipped from Earth. Emma slept most of the time, which Katie had been told was normal for newborns. When Emma was awake, Katie fed her, changed her, and held her close. Kara visited Katie during the break, bringing food and supplies. The Delphi was amazed by how small Emma was. Delphi infants were much larger and more developed at birth. Emma seemed impossibly fragile, yet Katie handled her with a confidence that surprised Kara. Katie explained that human babies were born relatively helpless compared to other species, but they developed quickly. Emma would grow and learn fast. For now, Katie just needed to keep her fed, clean, and loved. The day before classes resumed, Katie received a message from Elder Voss. The ancient being requested a meeting to discuss her plans. Katie bundled Emma in a carrier that held the baby against her chest and went to his office. She had a feeling she knew what this conversation would be about. Elder Voss looked at Katie and the infant with an expression she couldn't read. He said that no one would fault her for withdrawing now. She had proven her determination by getting this far. She had given birth to healthy offspring, which was itself an accomplishment. But surely she understood that continuing her studies now would be impossible. Newborns required constant care. Katie would need to feed the infant every few hours. She would be exhausted from lack of sleep. Her focus would be divided. The academy could arrange for her to return in a year or two when the child was older. Katie adjusted Emma in the carrier, feeling the warmth of her daughter against her chest. She told Elder Voss that she appreciated his concern, but her answer remained the same. She was not withdrawing. She had less than 4 months until graduation. Her research project was nearly complete. Her grades were strong. Nothing had changed except that now she had Emma with her. Human women had been working and caring for infants simultaneously for thousands of years. Katie would do the same. Elder Voss was silent for a long moment. Then he said that he had expected this answer. He reminded Katie that there would be no special treatment. If she fell behind on her work, she would fail. If Emma's presence disrupted other students, Katie would be asked to make other arrangements. The standards would not be lowered. Katie said she understood and accepted these terms. When Katie walked into her first class after the break, every eye in the room turned to her. Emma was strapped to her chest in the carrier, sleeping peacefully. Katie took her usual seat and pulled out her data pad, ready to take notes. The instructor, a being from a species that communicated through color changes, seemed uncertain how to proceed. Finally, the lecture began, and Katie focused on learning while Emma slept against her. The other students were fascinated and disturbed in equal measure. During the break between classes, several of them approached Katie with questions. Was the infant sick? Why was Katie carrying her everywhere? Didn't human offspring need to be in some kind of protective environment? Katie patiently explained that Emma was perfectly healthy. Human babies needed to be close to their mothers. The carrier allowed Katie to keep Emma safe and comfortable while still having her hands free to work. Zek-7 approached Katie with new calculations. The crystal being had factored in the infant's needs and determined that Katie's available study time had been reduced by approximately 60%. Sleep requirements alone would cut into her productivity significantly. Add in feeding, cleaning, and basic care, and Katie should have almost no time for academic work. The math showed failure was now 95% probable. Katie looked at the calculations and then looked at Zek-7. She told the Vex that human mothers had been beating impossible odds since the beginning of their species. Math was useful, but it couldn't account for determination, adaptability, and stubbornness. Katie would find a way to make it work because failure simply wasn't an option. Zek-7's surface rippled with colors that suggested the being was beginning to understand that humans didn't always follow logical predictions. The first week was brutal. Emma woke up every 2 to 3 hours to feed, which meant Katie got very little sleep. She learned to study while nursing, balancing her data pad in one hand while Emma ate. She learned to write papers during Emma's naps. She learned to bring extra supplies to class in case Emma needed a diaper change. Other students watched this routine with amazement, unable to comprehend how Katie was managing it all. Emma was 3 months old when the most difficult part of the semester began. Katie sat in the advanced quantum field theory class with her daughter sleeping in the carrier against her chest. The instructor was presenting equations so complex that even the Vex student seemed challenged. Katie's eyes were red from lack of sleep, but her focus was sharp. She had learned to function on 4 hours of broken sleep a night. It wasn't pleasant, but it was possible. The class was working on theoretical problems that required understanding multiple dimensions simultaneously. Katie's brain felt sluggish as she tried to wrap her mind around the concepts. Emma stirred slightly, and Katie gently rocked back and forth while keeping her eyes on the holographic display. She had become an expert at multitasking. Her attention split between complex physics and her daughter's needs. After class, Katie headed to the library to work on her research project. She had chosen to study quantum entanglement in organic neural networks, exploring how information might be shared instantly across vast distances using biological systems. The project required both theoretical calculations and practical experiments. Katie had set up a small workspace in one corner of the library, where she could spread out her materials while keeping Emma nearby in a portable crib. Today's work involved analyzing data from her latest experiment. Katie pulled up the results on her datapad and began running statistical analyses. Emma woke up and started to fuss. Without looking away from her work, Katie picked up a bottle she had prepared earlier and began feeding Emma while continuing to work with one hand. Other students in the library stared, but Katie had stopped caring what they thought weeks ago. The bottle finished, Katie shifted Emma to her shoulder to burp her. The baby made a small noise and spit up slightly on Katie's uniform. Katie wiped it off with a cloth she kept in her bag for exactly this purpose, then went back to her data analysis. This had become her life now. Work interrupted by baby care, interrupted by more work, interrupted by more baby care. It was exhausting and chaotic, and somehow she was making it work. Her xenobiology fieldwork class presented a different challenge. The class was required to do practical work with living organisms from various worlds. This week, they were studying a species of insect-like creatures from a high-gravity world. The work required precise movements and absolute focus. One mistake could result in injury or contamination of the samples. Katie stood at her workstation with Emma strapped to her back this time. The carrier could be adjusted to hold the baby in different positions. Having Emma on her back kept Katie's hands free and her front clear for working. As she carefully manipulated the alien insects using specialized tools, Emma babbled softly. The sound was soothing rather than distracting. Katie had learned that Emma's presence actually helped her stay calm under pressure. Krath was working at the station next to Katie's. The massive Kryn warrior kept glancing over at her, watching how she managed to work while caring for Emma. At one point, Emma started crying. Katie calmly set down her tools, swung the carrier around to her front, and checked on her daughter. Emma was just fussy, not hurt or hungry. Katie soothed her with soft words and gentle rocking until the baby calmed down. Then she swung the carrier back around and returned to her work. After class, Krath approached Katie with an observation. He said that at first he had thought her method was chaos, trying to do two important things at once. But now he was beginning to see it differently. Katie wasn't dividing her attention between two tasks. She had integrated them into one continuous flow. She moved between motherhood and scholarship so smoothly that they seemed to be parts of the same activity. It was a kind of efficiency the Kryn had not considered before. Katie smiled at this. She explained that human women had been doing this for their entire history. Mothers worked in fields while carrying babies. They cooked while nursing infants. They built societies while raising children. It wasn't about doing two things at once. It was about making both things part of the same life, the same rhythm. Modern human culture had sometimes forgotten this, trying to separate work and family into different boxes. But Katie had learned from the wisdom of countless generations of human mothers. Life didn't pause for parenting, and parenting didn't pause for life. The diplomacy seminar brought another test of Katie's abilities. Elder Voss was teaching a unit on crisis negotiation between hostile species. The students were divided into groups and given scenarios to resolve. Katie's group included Zek-7 Kara and two students from a species called the Nexari who communicated through scent. During the group discussion, Emma started crying loudly. Katie apologized and moved to a corner of the room to see what was wrong. Emma needed a diaper change. Katie laid out a changing mat on the floor and quickly took care of the problem, talking softly to Emma the whole time. The other students in the room watched with fascination. Some species didn't understand the concept of bodily waste requiring immediate attention. They found the entire process strange and somewhat amusing. Katie returned to her group with a calm Emma, and they continued their discussion. Zek-7 commented that Katie's ability to maintain focus while dealing with such interruptions was remarkable. The Vex calculated that most beings would have their concentration completely broken by such an event. Katie's ability to switch tasks and then return to the problem at hand without losing her place suggested a kind of mental flexibility that Zek-7 found intriguing. The group's solution to the negotiation scenario was eventually selected by Elder Voss as the best in the class. Katie had contributed a key insight about finding common ground between species with very different values. Elder Voss praised the group's work, then looked directly at Katie. He said that her perspective on finding balance between competing demands had clearly informed her approach to the assignment. Perhaps there were lessons in her experience that extended beyond her personal situation. Katie's research project reached a critical phase. She needed to present her preliminary findings at an academy symposium, where students and faculty would gather to share their work. This was a required component of graduation. The presentation needed to be thorough, professional, and demonstrate a deep understanding of the subject matter. Katie had been preparing for weeks, but she still felt nervous. The day of the symposium arrived. Katie wore her best professional clothing, which she had to have adjusted to fit her post-pregnancy body. Emma was secured in the carrier on her back, dressed in a simple baby outfit. Katie had timed everything carefully. She had fed Emma right before the symposium began, and with luck, the baby would sleep through most of Katie's presentation. Katie's turn came. She walked to the front of the large auditorium where hundreds of students and faculty were gathered. She pulled up her presentation on the holographic display and began speaking. Her voice was clear and confident as she explained her research on quantum entanglement in organic neural networks. She described her methodology, showed her data, and discussed the implications of her findings. 15 minutes into the presentation, Emma woke up and started fussing. Katie paused, reached back to pat Emma gently, and continued talking without missing a beat. Emma fussed a bit more, then settled down. Katie finished her presentation with the same professional composure she had started with. The question and answer session that followed was intense. Faculty members challenged her methodology and asked for clarification on various points. Katie answered each question thoughtfully, demonstrating a deep understanding of her work. At one point, Emma started crying. Katie calmly swung the carrier around, checked that Emma was okay, gave her a pacifier, and then addressed the next question. The faculty members seemed almost impressed by her ability to remain unruffled. After the symposium, several faculty members approached Katie. One of them, a professor from a species that resembled large birds, told Katie that her presentation was one of the strongest they had seen in years. The research itself was solid, but what impressed them more was Katie's poise under pressure. Presenting complex research while simultaneously caring for an infant required a kind of composure that was rare at any level of academia. Kara found Katie afterward and gave her a long hug. The Delphi was practically glowing with pride for her friend. She said that Katie had proven something important today. She had shown everyone that humans could thrive in situations where other species would struggle. More than that, she had done it with grace and dignity. That night, Katie sat in her quarters with Emma sleeping in her arms. She was exhausted but satisfied. She had completed her research presentation successfully. She had maintained her grades throughout one of the most difficult academic periods. She had cared for Emma while managing an impossible workload. And she was still standing. Just a few more weeks until final exams and then graduation. Katie allowed herself a moment to believe that she was actually going to make it. The faculty lounge of the Interstellar Academy was normally a quiet place where instructors from different species gathered to discuss academic matters. Today it was buzzing with conversation. The topic was the same one that had dominated discussions across the academy for months now. Katie Morgan and her impossible achievement. Professor Hennix, the bird-like being who taught advanced theoretical physics, was speaking to a group of colleagues. Hennix had been teaching at the academy for over 2 centuries and claimed to have seen everything. But Katie's situation had challenged assumptions that Hennix didn't even know existed. The professor explained that after watching Katie's research presentation, they had gone back and studied human history more carefully. What they found was remarkable. Humans had built their entire civilization while simultaneously raising offspring. Other species separated these activities. The Vex focused on creation and production, then periodically reproduced. The Kryn had dedicated breeding seasons. The Zeph expanded their collective only during specific ceremonial periods. But humans did everything at once. They built cities while pregnant. They made scientific discoveries while nursing infants. They went to war while caring for children. It was chaos by any logical standard, yet somehow it worked. Dr. Venna joined the conversation, sharing her medical perspective. She had been studying human physiology in detail since Katie's pregnancy began. What she found challenged her understanding of biological efficiency. Most species optimize their bodies for specific functions. When Adelphi was pregnant, their body chemistry changed to focus entirely on gestation. Their cognitive abilities actually decreased during this period because all resources were directed toward creating offspring. But human bodies didn't work that way. Human women remained fully functional throughout pregnancy. Their brains didn't shut down. Their ability to work and think and create continued without interruption. Yes, there were physical discomforts and challenges, but the basic capability remained intact. It was inefficient by pure biological standards, yet it gave humans an enormous advantage. They could maintain their civilization without pausing for reproduction. Elder Voss had been listening to these conversations from his corner of the lounge. The ancient being finally spoke, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of experience. He said that the faculty were beginning to understand what made humans different, but they were still missing the deeper truth. It wasn't just about biological multitasking. It was about something fundamental to human nature. Voss explained that most advanced species in the galaxy had achieved their technological development by optimizing. They identified the most efficient path to a goal and followed it without deviation. They specialized, focused, and eliminated distractions. This approach had allowed them to build impressive civilizations, but it also made them somewhat rigid. They struggled with unexpected changes or situations that didn't fit their models. Humans had taken a different evolutionary path. Earth had been a brutal world, with constantly changing conditions and endless challenges. Humans couldn't afford to optimize for one thing because they never knew what they would face next, so they developed the ability to adapt. They learned to juggle multiple demands simultaneously. They became generalists rather than specialists. This made them less efficient in ideal conditions, but far more capable in chaotic ones. Katie wasn't doing something unusual for a human, Voss concluded. She was doing what human women had always done. She was adapting to her circumstances, balancing multiple demands and refusing to accept that she had to choose between her goals. The galaxy found this remarkable because most species couldn't function that way, but for humans, it was just normal. This conversation reached the students through informal channels, the way important ideas always spread through academic communities. Zek7 heard about it from another Vex student who had overheard faculty discussions. The crystal being spent days processing this information, running new calculations that tried to account for human adaptability as a quantifiable variable. Zek7 approached Katie in the library one afternoon while she was studying. Emma was playing on a blanket nearby, now old enough to reach for toys and make babbling sounds. The Vex stood silently for a moment, its crystalline surface displaying patterns Katie had never seen before. Finally, Zek7 spoke. The being said that it had been wrong about Katie, not just wrong in its probability calculations, but wrong in its fundamental understanding of what Katie was attempting. Zek7 had viewed Katie's situation as an error state, a deviation from optimal conditions that would necessarily lead to failure, but that framework itself was flawed. Katie wasn't trying to maintain optimal conditions. She was demonstrating that humans didn't need optimal conditions to succeed. Katie looked up from her datapad and smiled. She told Zek7 that she appreciated the being's efforts to understand. She knew that what she was doing didn't make sense from a purely logical standpoint, but humans weren't purely logical creatures. They were emotional, messy, stubborn beings who did impossible things because they cared more about the goal than the difficulty of reaching it. Zek7's surface rippled with colors, and then the Vex did something Katie had never seen before. The crystal being reached out one of its appendages and gently touched Emma's hand. The baby grabbed the crystalline finger and laughed. Zek7 stood very still as if processing this interaction. Then the being said that Emma was fortunate to have Katie as a mother. Any offspring raised by someone so determined would likely become quite capable themselves. A visiting dignitary arrived at the academy during this time. Ambassador Lyra represented the Ascended beings, one of the oldest and most advanced species in the galaxy. The Ascended had evolved beyond physical form millions of years ago, existing now as beings of pure energy. They rarely involved themselves in the affairs of younger species, but they took an interest in education and the development of new civilizations. Lyra had specifically requested to observe classes at the academy, and Elder Voss suspected the true reason was to see Katie. The ambassador attended several of Katie's classes, always sitting quietly in the back of the room. Emma seemed fascinated by Lyra, staring at the energy being with wide eyes. Lyra noticed this attention and seemed amused by it. After a week of observation, Lyra requested a private meeting with Katie. The human student arrived at the designated room with Emma, unsure what to expect. Lyra appeared as a vaguely humanoid shape made of soft, glowing light. Her voice was gentle and ancient. Lyra began by explaining that the Ascended had been watching humanity since Earth joined the galactic community 50 years ago. The elder species had seen thousands of civilizations rise and fall over millions of years. They had learned to recognize patterns in how species developed and what determined their success or failure in the broader galactic community. Humans puzzled the Ascended. They were not particularly strong or intelligent compared to many species. Their technology was primitive. Their civilization was young and chaotic. By most measures, they should have remained minor players in galactic affairs. Yet humanity was spreading through the galaxy faster than predicted, integrating into galactic society more successfully than species that had been spacefaring for centuries. Lyra said that watching Katie had helped them understand why. Humans retained something that most advanced species had lost during their development. They maintained the ability to function in imperfect conditions, to adapt to unexpected challenges, to balance competing demands without breaking under the pressure. Most species optimized themselves into narrow niches of capability. Humans remained generalists, capable of doing many things adequately rather than one thing perfectly. Katie listened carefully, Emma sitting in her lap and chewing on a toy. She asked if that meant humans were somehow better than other species. Lyra said no. Every species had strengths and weaknesses. The Vex could process information at speeds humans couldn't dream of. The Kryn could survive physical damage that would kill a human instantly. The Ascended themselves had transcended physical limitations entirely, but humans had resilience. They had the ability to endure, adapt, and continue when others would falter. In a galaxy that was constantly changing, where new challenges emerged regularly, that resilience was valuable. The Ascended believed that humanity would play an important role in the future of the galactic community, not because they were superior, but because they brought something different to the table. Lyra looked at Emma and said something that Katie would remember forever. The ambassador said that Emma represented humanity's future. She was being raised by a mother who refused to accept limitations, who demonstrated daily that impossible simply meant difficult. Emma would grow up believing she could do anything if she worked hard enough. That belief, multiplied across billions of humans, would shape the galaxy in ways no one could yet predict. The meeting ended, and Katie walked back to her quarters thinking about Lyra's words. She looked down at Emma, who was falling asleep in her arms. Katie whispered to her daughter that the ambassador was right about one thing. Emma could do anything she set her mind to. But first, Katie had to finish what she had started. She had final exams coming up and then graduation. Just a little bit longer and Katie would prove. The morning of graduation arrived with the kind of perfect timing that Katie had stopped believing in. Emma had actually slept through most of the night, giving Katie almost 6 consecutive hours of rest. She woke up feeling more refreshed than she had in months. Looking at the date on her data pad, Katie felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had made it. Against all predictions, despite every obstacle, she was going to graduate today. Katie dressed carefully in the formal graduation robes that all students wore during the ceremony. The dark blue fabric marked her as a quantum mechanics and xenobiology graduate. She had to adjust the fit slightly because her body still hadn't fully returned to its pre-pregnancy shape. But the robes were designed to be flexible for different species' body types. Emma wore a simple white outfit that Katie had brought from Earth specifically for this occasion. As Katie prepared to leave her quarters, she took a moment to look around the small room that had been her home for 4 years. So much had happened here. So many late nights studying, so many moments of doubt. And finally, so many memories of caring for Emma, while somehow managing to finish her degree. She felt a deep sense of accomplishment mixed with relief. It was almost over. The graduation ceremony was held in the Grand Hall, a massive crystalline dome that offered a stunning view of the stars beyond. The hall could accommodate thousands of beings, and today it was filled to capacity. Students from hundreds of species sat in designated sections, their families and friends filling the observation areas above. Katie took her place in line with the other graduating students, Emma secure in the carrier against her chest. Around her, Katie could hear the whispers. Even after months of seeing her in classes with Emma, the other students still found her situation remarkable. Some of the whispers were admiring, others confused, but Katie had learned to tune them out. Today was about celebrating an achievement, not worrying about what others thought. Zex 7 stood in line near Katie, positioned with the other Vex graduates. The crystal being's surface flashed blue in Katie's direction, which she had learned was the Vex version of a friendly greeting. Over the past months, Zex 7 had become something close to a friend, though the Vex didn't really understand friendship in the human sense. Still, they had been reliable study partners and had helped Katie more than once when she needed it. Kara was also in the graduation line. her fur groomed specially for the occasion and her large eyes bright with excitement. The Delphi had been Katie's closest friend throughout this entire journey, offering support and encouragement when Katie needed it most. They exchanged smiles across the distance, both of them understanding how significant this moment was. Even Krath was present, his massive form making him stand out among the other graduates. The Kryn warrior had surprised Katie by approaching her the day before to tell her that she had earned his respect. In Kryn culture, respect from a warrior was one of the highest honors possible. Katie had been genuinely touched by the gesture. The ceremony began with traditional music from various worlds playing simultaneously, creating a harmonious blend of sounds that represented the galactic community. Elder Voss took the stage, his ancient form commanding attention from everyone present. He spoke about the Academy's mission to foster understanding between species and to prepare the next generation of leaders, scientists and diplomats who would shape the galaxy's future. As Voss spoke, Emma started to fuss slightly. Katie gently rocked back and forth, a movement so natural now that she barely thought about it. Emma quieted down, content with the motion and the sound of her mother's heartbeat. Several students near Katie watched this interaction with fascination. Even after months of observation, they still found the bond between human mothers and offspring remarkable. The individual degree presentations began. Students walked across the stage one by one as their names were called, receiving their diplomas from Elder Voss and the faculty members. Each graduate represented years of hard work and dedication. Some species sent only their most exceptional individuals to the Academy, making graduation an honor that would define their entire lives. Katie's section was called. Her heart began beating faster as she stood and moved toward the stage with the other graduates from her program. Emma was awake now, her bright eyes looking around at all the lights and movement. Katie held her daughter close, feeling the weight of the moment. This was it, the final step in a journey that had tested her in ways she never could have imagined. Her name was announced. Katie Morgan, graduating with honors in quantum mechanics and xenobiology. Katie walked across the stage with Emma in her arms. The lights were bright, and she could see thousands of faces watching her. For a moment, everything seemed to move in slow motion. Elder Voss stood waiting with her diploma, his expression showing something Katie had never seen before. Respect, perhaps even admiration. Katie reached Voss and shifted Emma slightly so she could accept the diploma with one hand. The ancient being handed her the document, then did something unprecedented. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of deep respect that he had never shown any student in recorded Academy history. Katie was too surprised to react at first, then returned the bow as best she could while holding Emma and the diploma. Then something extraordinary happened. From somewhere in the audience, a single being stood up, then another, then another. Within seconds, the entire grand hall was on its feet, thousands of beings from hundreds of species all rising in unison. The sound started quietly, then grew louder. It wasn't quite applause because many species didn't clap. Instead, it was a symphony of approval expressed in countless ways. The Vex created harmonic resonances with their crystalline bodies, a sound like countless bells ringing in perfect harmony. Katie had read that the Vex only did this for achievements they considered truly significant. The Kryn were banging their fists against their chests in the warrior's salute, the highest honor their culture could give. The Delphi were humming in their characteristic way, a sound that expressed joy and celebration. The Zeph collective was vibrating in unison, creating a deep thrumming that Katie could feel in her chest. Even the ascended being, Ambassador Lyra, was there in the audience. The energy being was glowing brighter than before, pulsing with light in a pattern that seemed to express approval. Species that Katie didn't even recognize were showing their respect in ways unique to their cultures. The entire Academy, faculty and students alike, was acknowledging what Katie had accomplished. Katie stood on the stage, Emma in her arms, tears streaming down her face. She had expected to graduate quietly, perhaps with some polite acknowledgement of her achievement. She had never imagined this. The ovation continued for several minutes, far longer than for any other graduate. Elder Voss stood beside her, waiting patiently for the noise to die down. Finally, the hall grew quiet again. Voss spoke, his ancient voice carrying to every corner of the massive space. He said that in over 1,000 years of the Academy's history, he had never been more proud to award a degree. Katie Morgan had demonstrated something that the galaxy needed to see. She had shown that determination and adaptability could overcome obstacles that logic said were impossible. She had proven that humans brought something unique and valuable to the galactic community. Voss turned to Katie and spoke directly to her, though his words were broadcast to everyone present. He said that Katie had changed the academy. Future students would face fewer arbitrary restrictions on what they could or couldn't do while pursuing their education. The rigid rules that had existed for centuries would be examined and revised, all because one human woman had refused to accept that she had to choose between her dreams and her family. Katie tried to speak, to thank everyone, but her voice caught with emotion. She looked down at Emma, who was staring up at her mother with those bright, curious eyes. Katie thought about everything she had been through to get to this moment. The exhaustion, the doubt, the countless times she had wanted to give up. She thought about all the people who had supported her, especially Kara, and even the ones who had doubted her but pushed her to prove them wrong. She managed to whisper a simple thank you before walking off the stage. The ovation started again as she moved back to her seat. Other students reached out to touch her arm or hand as she passed, their way of showing respect. Katie felt overwhelmed by it all, but also deeply satisfied. She had set out to do something impossible, and she had succeeded. The ceremony continued with the remaining graduates, but Katie barely heard it. She sat holding Emma, her diploma clutched in one hand, and let herself simply exist in this moment of triumph. She had graduated from the Interstellar Academy. She had done it while pregnant and then while caring for a newborn. She had proven something important, not just to the galaxy, but to herself. As the ceremony ended and students began filing out of the grand hall, Katie was approached by dozens of beings wanting to congratulate her. Faculty members who had doubted her came to acknowledge their error. Students from species she had never even spoken to wanted to express their admiration. Even Elder Voss sought her out afterward to speak with her privately. The ancient being told Katie that her story would be recorded in the Academy's permanent archives. Future generations of students would. The news spread through the galaxy faster than Katie could have imagined. Within days of graduation, her story was being discussed on worlds she had never visited by species she had never heard of. The human who graduated with her baby had become a symbol of something larger than herself. Communications networks across the galactic community carried the story, each species interpreting it through their own cultural lens. On the crystalline worlds of the Vex Collective, scholars debated how Katie's achievement challenged their understanding of optimal performance. They began studying human adaptability as a legitimate alternative to their traditional emphasis on specialized efficiency. Some Vex philosophers even suggested that their species might benefit from incorporating more flexibility into their rigid systems of thought and action. The Kryn warrior clans held councils to discuss what Katie's success meant for their definition of strength. Younger warriors argued that the clan should recognize different forms of honor beyond combat prowess. Katie Morgan had shown warrior spirit by refusing to surrender in the face of overwhelming odds. The debates were fierce, but slowly, the Kryn began to expand their understanding of what made someone truly strong. Even the Zeph Collective, which typically showed little interest in individual achievements, spent processing time analyzing Katie's actions. They found the concept of simultaneous multitasking fascinating. The collective had always operated through perfect coordination, with each member focused on a specific task. The idea that a single being could manage multiple complex responsibilities simultaneously challenged their assumptions about optimal resource allocation. Katie herself returned to her quarters after graduation feeling strangely hollow. She had achieved her goal, proven her point, and made history. But now what? She sat with Emma, who was now 8 months old and becoming more active every day. The baby was pulling herself up on furniture and making sounds that seemed almost like words. Katie marveled at how much Emma had grown during the past months. A message arrived on Katie's datapad. It was from Elder Voss requesting a meeting. Katie bundled Emma up and headed to his office, wondering what the ancient being wanted. When she arrived, she found not just Voss but several other faculty members present. They had a proposal for her. The Academy wanted Katie to join the faculty as an instructor. They explained that her unique perspective and demonstrated capabilities would make her valuable to the institution. More than that, they believed her presence would help change the Academy's culture. Students needed to see that there were multiple paths to success, multiple ways of approaching challenges. Katie represented a different way of thinking that the Academy needed. Katie was stunned. She had assumed she would leave Station Zenith after graduation, perhaps return to Earth or find work at one of the human research stations scattered across the galaxy. She had never considered staying at the Academy. But as she thought about it, the idea began to appeal to her. She could continue her research while teaching the next generation. She could prove that being a mother and a scholar weren't mutually exclusive roles. She accepted the position. Within weeks, Katie Morgan became Professor Katie Morgan, one of the youngest faculty members in the Academy's 1,000-year history. She taught courses in quantum mechanics and xenobiology, bringing a practical, hands-on approach that students found refreshing. Emma often accompanied her to classes in those early months, and students grew accustomed to the sight of their professor caring for an infant while explaining complex scientific concepts. The Academy began making changes inspired by Katie's experience. The strict rules about students needing to maintain continuous enrollment were relaxed. New support systems were created for students facing unexpected life challenges. A child care facility was established for the first time in the Academy's history, staffed by beings from nurturing species who wanted to help. The changes were gradual but significant, shifting the Academy's culture toward greater flexibility and understanding. Katie's research continued and even expanded. Her work on quantum entanglement in organic neural networks attracted attention from scientists across the galaxy. She published papers that challenged conventional thinking and proposed new models for understanding how information could be shared across vast distances using biological systems. Her success as a researcher proved that becoming a mother hadn't diminished her capabilities. If anything, the experience had given her new insights into adaptability and resilience that informed her scientific work. Emma grew up surrounded by aliens from hundreds of worlds. Her first words were a mixture of human languages and sounds from species she heard daily. She learned to walk in the variable gravity sections of the station, developing an intuitive understanding of physics that most children didn't acquire until much later. She was comfortable around beings that would terrify most human children, seeing them simply as the normal residents of her world. Years passed. Katie watched as more human students arrived at the Academy, some bringing their own unique circumstances and challenges. A human man arrived with a young child he was raising alone after his partner's death. A human woman came while caring for an elderly parent who needed regular medical attention. Each of them faced doubt and skepticism, but they also found inspiration in Katie's story. If Professor Morgan could graduate with a baby, surely they could succeed with their own challenges. Katie became a mentor to these students, offering advice and support based on her own experience. She told them that the key wasn't to separate their lives into neat boxes labeled work and family and personal time. The key was integration, finding ways to let all the parts of their lives flow together naturally. Human beings were designed to be generalists, capable of managing multiple responsibilities simultaneously. It was chaotic and exhausting, but it was also deeply human. The galactic research community began studying human child-rearing practices more seriously. Scientists from dozens of species visited Earth to observe how human societies managed to function while raising offspring. They were particularly interested in how human women could maintain full cognitive function during pregnancy and afterward. The research led to new understandings of biological efficiency and adaptation. Some species even began adapting human approaches to their own societies. The Delphi, who had always required extensive rest periods during pregnancy, started experimenting with staying more active. They found that while they couldn't match human levels of activity, some modification of their traditional practices did lead to better outcomes. The research was preliminary, but it suggested that humans might have developed strategies that had broader applications across species. Ambassador Lyra visited the Academy regularly during these years, always making time to speak with Katie. The ascended being seemed genuinely interested in Emma's development, watching the child grow with what Katie sensed was a kind of benevolent curiosity. During one visit, Lyra told Katie that the Ascended had been observing humanity for 50 years, but the past few years had taught them more than the previous 5 decades combined. Lyra explained that the Ascended had initially viewed humans as another young, species that would probably follow the same developmental path as most others. They would advance technologically, optimize their society for efficiency, and gradually lose the messy, chaotic elements that characterized primitive cultures. But humans weren't following that path. They were advancing while retaining their essential humanity. They were building a galactic presence while maintaining the adaptability and resilience that had always defined them. Katie asked what that meant for humanity's future. Lyra said the Ascended couldn't predict the future with certainty, but they believed humanity would play a crucial role in shaping the galaxy's destiny. The galactic community had become somewhat stagnant, with most species locked into established patterns of thought and behavior. Humans brought fresh perspectives and a willingness to try approaches that others considered illogical. That creativity and adaptability would become increasingly valuable as the galaxy faced new challenges. When Emma was old enough to understand, Katie told her about the day she graduated. They sat in Katie's office at the academy, surrounded by research equipment and academic materials. Emma, now 7 years old and sharp as a tack, listened carefully as Katie described the ovation, the speeches, and the moment when the entire galaxy seemed to recognize that something important had happened. Emma asked why everyone had been so surprised. After all, her mother was obviously capable of doing amazing things. Wasn't it normal? Katie smiled and explained that for humans, yes, it was relatively normal. Human women had been balancing work and family for their entire history. But most species in the galaxy didn't function that way. They specialized, focusing on one thing at a time. The idea of doing multiple important things simultaneously seemed impossible to them. Katie told Emma that humans had a special gift. They didn't quit. When faced with obstacles, they adapted and found new ways forward. When told something was impossible, they took it as a challenge rather than a limitation. That stubborn determination, that refusal to accept defeat, was humanity's greatest strength. It wasn't about being smarter or stronger than other species. It was about being persistent, adaptable,